You know that feeling you get? The one you can't explain, but you know when someone is staring at you or something is watching you. That base instinct to help you survive when a predator is watching you, hunting you. Trust that feeling. It may be the difference between life and death for you one day. The paranormal has a funny way of making itself known through feelings like this. Please take my warning to heart and learn from my mistakes. It may already be too late for me to learn from them. Regret is a heavy burden, and I am not sure how much longer I have left. I can feel it. He will be here soon. The eyes outside the window are watching me as I write this, and the whispers in my ears are telling me my soon-to-be fate. I am hiding in one of the pews at the church on the edge of town, but I can't stay here forever. I'm more scared than I have ever been in my life, but I know I have to go back out there. I have to face what I brought upon myself. I may be able to find the answer in this book, but I may be out of time. Hopefully, whoever finds it after me can finish this for me. So buckle up, dear reader. This is going to be a long one. For you to understand what happened, we have to go back to the beginning, to the moment that shaped me into who I am today. I was 10 years old, and this Halloween was about to become one of the most unforgettable experiences of my childhood. My parents, thinking I was finally old enough, agreed to take me to my first haunted house attraction. I had pleaded and promised, swearing that I wouldn't have nightmares and that I'd do anything they asked if they just took me. The convincing paid off, and I was ready to face the thrill, even if it meant doing extra chores around the house. It was at the old Breyer House, famous in my town for having supposed real ghosts that would walk the halls in the late hours. If you were in that house past midnight, you would supposedly experience this all for yourself, but no one believed in it except for the family who owned it. The night had finally arrived. Halloween, my absolute favorite time of the year. I was all set for trick-or-treating and the haunted house that followed. I was bursting with excitement. I got into my zombie costume and had my mom help me with the makeup. Then, with my orange pumpkin bucket in hand, I was ready to kick off the night. I could barely focus on trick-or-treating because all I could think about was that house. When my mom and dad finally told me it was time to go, I jumped up and down, both from overeating sugar and pure excitement for finally being able to go to that house. We drove over, and all I did was stare out the car's window, watching the trees go by as we drove down the darkening road toward the Breyer House. The road turned to dirt, and before long, we arrived. I jumped out of the car barely half a second after we parked. I took in the house in all its terrifying and exciting glory. The house was old, and the white paint peeled everywhere, revealing the plain aged wood underneath. The windows looked like they hadn't been used in ages. It had an old porch that wrapped around the house and rickety-looking stairs leading up to the front door. A man and woman were standing there waiting with a small group of maybe 6 others. My dad led the way, me hot on his heels, as we walked up the old creaking stairs to be greeted by the man and woman. They introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Breyer. I waved, sporting a big toothy grin, missing one of my bottom teeth, and introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Kayla." With a little wave, the couple laughed. "Well, hello there, little Kayla. You seem pretty excited," said Mr. Breyer. "Yes, I am, mister. I'm going to see me some ghosts," I said back, still smiling. Mr. and Mrs. Breyer both laughed again, politely smiling down at me before turning back to the group and making his introduction, as did Mrs. Breyer. They then explained the group's rules. "Don't wander around by yourself. Stay with the rest of the group. Don't touch anything in the house. It is very old, and we don't want any pieces of our family history being broken." I zoned out, staring, turning around to look at the dark windows of the house. As I could have sworn I saw a figure move past the windows as I watched. Shrugging, I returned to listening to Mr. Breyer as he finished his speech. "Lastly, enjoy yourself and remember you're safe as long as you stay with us." He gave a slight chuckle as he said that last part before saying, "All right, follow me." The group followed Mr. and Mrs. Breyer inside the house. I followed behind my mom and dad in the back of the group, mesmerized by everything I saw. The house inside wasn't as dark as it appeared on the outside. As we entered, lit candles were all over the inside, illuminating old paintings and the worn wooden walls. I listened briefly to what Mr. Breyer was saying about the house's history, but I only cared to see if the ghosts were real. I had heard so much about this house from other kids at school. The original Breyer family lived in it, and they were murdered late one night by their eldest son, who had supposedly just gone crazy. Only one member of their family survived, the youngest son. He had woken up locked in his room, unable to get out, forced to listen to his own family being murdered. Some people believed he was possessed, others said it was witchcraft, but I now know the truth. I won't spoil that for you just yet. I was zoned out thinking about this story when I realized I wasn't with the group anymore, but standing before a dark doorway leading down into the basement. There was no candlelight down there. Ghosts couldn't be real, right? I told myself as I stared down into the blackness. Nothing would stop me from trying to prove that. That was, until now. I decided that night to take my first step into the world of the paranormal, the real world of the supernatural. My parents found me that night at the bottom of that basement, shaking and wide-eyed, unable to even speak. I was terrified out of my mind. At first, I couldn't remember anything when questioned about what happened, but as I got older, bits and pieces slowly came back to me. I never spoke about what I remembered to anyone except my friends. The most prominent memory I have is wandering through the dark, feeling hands grab at me and whispers all around me. There was a brief flash of a figure standing in a circle of black-lit candles that burned red, screaming. Then I remember my parents finding me, with the rest of the group watching from the top of the stairs. I always thought it was for the best that I couldn't remember what happened, but God, I wish I had. Maybe if I had, my decision tonight wouldn't have happened. I might even have pursued a different path in life, but there is nothing I can do to change that now. Ever since that night, I have been obsessed with the paranormal. As a child, I watched every movie and TV show, read books about the supernatural, and devoured an unhealthy amount of Stephen King. Spoiler alert, that hasn't changed now that I'm older. I had a small group of friends at school and didn't really hang out with too many people. I was considered one of the weird kids, but that never bothered me. I would sit at the lunch table in the cafeteria with Kate, Daniel, and Bryce, my small group of like-minded friends. Daniel was outgoing, and many people knew him at school because he played sports and participated in loads of extracurricular activities, but that didn't stop him from hanging out with us. Kate was in the same boat. She was a perfect student in school, popular on social media, and always wore makeup to match her curly blonde hair. She was very preppy, but get her talking about ghosts, and she wouldn't stop. She'd had some scary experiences when she was a kid at summer camp, but she never told anyone else until she met us, after hearing about what happened to me. Then there was Bryce, quiet and shy, a lot like me. He wasn't very outgoing, but still fun to hang out with. He was the wealthy grandson of the Breyer family and had heard my story. We bonded over sharing scary stories. They weren't as obsessed with the paranormal as I was, but were still very interested in it. I started becoming friends with them shortly after returning to school after my experience at the Breyer House. All the kids in school had heard what happened to me and either thought I was somehow possessed by the demon of the Breyer House, or just plain weird, all except Kate, Daniel, and Bryce. We were all sitting together, chatting about the plans we had made for that night. "So, are we still on for tonight?" Bryce asked excitedly. "Of course. You think I'd miss an opportunity like this?" I replied with a grin. We had made plans to sneak into the old Breyer house. Daniel had managed to secure a Ouija board, and Bryce, the grandson of the same Mr. and Mrs. Breyer who owned the house, had managed to get the key. His grandparents were out of town and had trusted him to watch their house until they got back. The plan was simple. Into the house around midnight and try to talk to whatever had shown itself to me all those years ago in that dark basement. We set up the Ouija board in the living room, lit a few candles, and hoped we could get in contact with whatever was in the house. "I'm literally both equally terrified and so excited," Kate said, giving a little fast clap of excitement. "We're going to be so famous if we manage to pull this off," Daniel said. "I already have my camera ready, so we can record the whole thing." "Good," I said. "Remember, if anything too crazy starts to happen, we are out of there. None of us need to get hurt to prove ghosts are real." They all nodded. The bell rang, signaling that lunch had ended, so we returned to class. I felt like I was 10 years old again, waiting for Halloween night. All I could think about the entire day was the Breyer House. What was going to happen tonight? Would this work? Could we really prove ghosts exist? These questions swirled around in my head until finally, the last bell for the day rang, releasing us from school. I quickly grabbed my backpack and practically sprinted to my car, hopping in and racing home to get ready for the night. I sat in my room, staring at posters of movies like The Conjuring, Annabelle, Paranormal Activity, and Insidious. My bedroom looked like Halloween had exploded inside it. A bookshelf full of horror novels stood on one side, decorated with Halloween ornaments year-round, right down to my pumpkin-themed bedsheets. I lay in bed for hours, drawing in my notebook, listening to horror stories on YouTube, and watching my phone count down the hours until 11 p.m. When the time finally came, I quietly got out of bed, put on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and snuck out my window. Luckily, I lived on the first floor, so the drop was minimal. Bryce's car was already outside, lights off, with 2 figures waiting inside. I ran over and hopped in. "Took you long enough," I joked to Bryce. "Yeah, well, we debated just going without you, but Daniel insisted we pick you up," Bryce teased. I slapped his shoulder, laughing as well. We couldn't stop talking during the 20-minute drive to the outskirts of town, speculating about what might happen. When we finally turned onto the familiar dirt road, the Breyer House loomed ahead, illuminated by the pale glow of the full moon. I couldn't help but smile as my heart raced with adrenaline and fear. Bryce parked the car facing the road for a quick getaway, and we climbed out. Daniel pulled a video camera from his backpack. "All right, guys, this is it," he said, turning on the camera. The red recording light blinked on. He panned the camera to Bryce. "First, we have our fearless driver and investigator, Bryce." Bryce grinned, giving a double thumbs up. "Next, we have our other investigator, Kate." Kate flipped her hair and blew a kiss at the camera. "And finally, our amazing lead investigator, Kayla." I gave the camera a shy wave. Daniel then turned the camera to himself. "And last, but not least, the most handsome and fearless member of this team, Daniel." Bryce laughed and punched him on the shoulder. "Keep dreaming, Daniel." Daniel ignored him, focusing the camera on the house. The Breyer House looked even more menacing under the moonlight. Bryce pulled a silver key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The smell of dust and damp wood greeted us. I handed out flashlights, and we illuminated the first room. Bryce lit some candles, their warm glow flickering against the peeling wallpaper and creaky staircase. I glanced up at the balcony overlooking the foyer and could have sworn I saw something shift in the shadows. My stomach dropped, but I shook it off. Daniel narrated into the camera as we moved to the living room, recounting the house's haunted history, including my childhood experience. Once in the living room, Bryce lit more candles while Daniel set up his camera to record. "Let's get this party started," Daniel said, pulling an Ouija board and planchette from his backpack. I placed 4 black candles on the table, and Bryce lit them. "Is everyone ready?" I asked. They nodded. We placed our fingers on the planchette, and I moved it 3 times in a clockwise motion. "Is there anyone here who would like to talk with us?" Silence. I cleared my throat. "Is there anyone here who wishes to speak to us? Come on, talk to us. We want to hear your version of the story," Bryce added. Moments later, the air grew colder. The candles flickered, and a shiver ran down my spine. "Whoa," Kate whispered, her voice trembling. "Hell yeah," Daniel said, turning to the camera. "We've got ourselves a real ghost." The planchette moved to yes. "What is your name?" I asked. The planchette spelled Jne. "Wait, Jane, as in Jane Breyer?" Bryce asked. The planchette moved back to yes. "That's my great-great-grandma," Bryce said. We asked question after question, and the planchette spelled out cryptic answers. "Is there a life after this? In a way." "Why haven't you moved on?" "Can't." "What actually happened here? Basement. Floor." "What does that even mean?" Daniel asked. "I've avoided the basement since what happened to Kayla," Bryce admitted, glancing at me. As we debated, the planchette moved again. K. My heart pounded. The words echoed in my mind. I felt blood trickle from my nose. Then everything went black. When I came to, I was on the couch. Everyone was staring at me. "Are you okay?" Kate asked, her voice trembling with fear.